Is it time for politicians to get a little Clearance 101 training? Hi, this is Lindy Kaiser with ClearanceJobs.com. A couple of reasons security clearances were in the news this week. One, President Joe Biden getting some scrutiny for some classified documents from his time as vice president that were uncovered. The other reason security clearances were in the news is the finally elected Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, actually talking about positions in the Senate Intelligence Committee and not allowing Representative Swalwell, who was previously on that committee, on due to some prior issues with Swalwell and an association with an alleged Chinese spy, Christine Fang, also known as Fang Fang. So the Swalwell story is a little interesting. You can actually read about it a few different ways over at Clearance Jobs. That story has been around for a couple of years. We had an article, even specifically, I think 2020, about how Swalwell had actually placed several interns that had been supposedly recommended by Christine Fang into certain offices. So we had some chatter at that time, some questions around congressional interns and should we be vetting interns that come in, especially if it turns out those interns have been recommended by someone affiliated with Chinese intelligence. Then also aspects of should Representative Swalwell himself be allowed to have access to classified information on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So there was some chatter before, requests for then Speaker Nancy Pelosi to remove Swalwell. I don't know the political ins and outs of all of that, but it's always worth a reminder that members of Congress do not go through a security clearance background investigation. That's a question we get sometimes at Clearance Jobs when these stories come out. Hey, how do these people get here? Obviously had all of that with Trump when he was in the White House. Hey, how do members of Congress, how do these people who are elected to political offices get clearance eligibility, and how are we vetting them? Well, the idea is that the vetting process should come through the electoral process. Vote wisely. Again, the security clearance policies that we talk about are born out of executive orders. The president has a lot of sway. There has been chatter before about requiring more vetting for members of Congress. Would that work? I don't know. Should we do some vetting for who is on our Senate Intelligence Committees? If you're a staff member on those committees, there is a process for undergoing background investigations. I think it would be wise to have some kind of a vetting process for members of Congress. Now, could the average member of Congress get or obtain security clearance eligibility based on the same adjudicative guidelines the average individual could? The answer in a lot of those cases might be no, but I think having similar self-reporting guidelines when it comes to foreign contacts and foreign influence, and having, we talk about in the clearance process, this actually came up in a conversation I had last week. Would the security clearance process be as effective if we didn't have consequences? So for instance, lying on your SF-86 comes with criminal penalties. So some kind of a vetting procedure where you have obligations and then you have a kick in the pants that comes back at you if you fail to fulfill those obligations. It might behoove the congressional body and parties and leaders to create some kind of an eligibility requirement for those specific committee positions where access to classified information is a frequent requirement, which is clearly the House Intelligence Committee. I'm not necessarily in a position to advise how to do that on a YouTube video, but if you want some ideas, call me, Congress, I'm here. But there's a lot of smart people in and around government. I think this is a good time to re-up that conversation. Clearly, we've had a series of high-level breaches of classified information, a lot of complex ideas behind how we can improve this. Overall, the move to open source and declassification are some of the things that are classified just because they fall across the president's desk. Should they be classified? That's a question. The other question is, should we be printing off all these documents? Because we have a lot of examples of documents that have been printed off, and that's a response here. So do we need to move to a process that's a little more paperless? I think those are valuable conversations that's come out of the Joe Biden, security breaches incidents, and having those classified documents found should have certainly come out of the conversation around former President Donald Trump as well. And in the member of Congress case, I always like to remind folks, some of the statements that Kevin McCarthy has made has been like, well, this guy couldn't obtain a security clearance in the private sector, so why are we giving him a security clearance? or eligible or access in Congress, everybody needs to start looking around to the left and right of them and making sure those requirements are across the board, because again, members of Congress have not typically ever had that requirement before. And I think if you start looking closely across members of Congress and vetting them based on the same requirements you do the average security clearance holder, we could run into some issues. Now, are there ways that we could make vetting better, specifically for key committee positions? Certainly the answer is probably yes. But again, it's just a reminder, we've covered this and written about it over at Clearance Jobs. So if you want more on Fang and all of that and why we are in this position now, you can read the history over at clearancejobs.com. And then again, if you want to read more on the policy for how and why members of Congress are not currently cleared and don't go through a typical security clearance process like you or I do, you can also read those articles over at clearancejobs.com. So count on politics to make the security clearance process hot again, and read more all about it, the scenes behind the scenes and the stories behind the headlines over at clearancejobs.com.